Staff Sergeant Maria Vasquez had been invisible for 8 months. Every morning at 0500 hours, she pushed her cleaning cart through the corridors of Fort Meridian, mopping floors that gleamed under fluorescent lights, emptying trash bins filled with classified documents that no one thought she could read, and scrubbing toilets used by officers who looked right through her as if she didn't exist. But Maria wasn't just any janitor. She was a decorated Army sniper with 127 confirmed kills. A woman who had once held the enemy at bay for 18 hours straight during the siege of Kandahar. The same steady hands that now gripped the mop handle had once made an impossible 1,200-yard shot that saved an entire platoon from annihilation. When a terrorist cell infiltrated Fort Meridian with inside help, planning to detonate a stolen nuclear device in the heart of America's most critical military installation, it would be Maria's forgotten skills and her janitor's access to every corner of the base that would stand between thousands of lives and certain death. The alarm clock buzzed at 4:30 a.m., just as it had every morning for the past 243 days. Maria rolled out of her narrow bunk in the enlisted women's quarters, her body moving with the mechanical precision of someone who had learned to function on 3 hours of sleep in far more dangerous places than Nevada. The room was small and sparse, containing only the bare essentials: a metal bed frame, a worn dresser, and a single photograph on the nightstand showing her with Delta Company in Afghanistan, her sniper rifle cradled in her arms like a trusted companion. That rifle now sat locked away in the base armory, gathering dust while she wielded cleaning supplies instead of precision weapons. Maria, dressed quickly in the standard issue gray uniform that marked her as part of the base's invisible workforce. The fabric was rough and utilitarian, a far cry from the combat gear she had worn with pride for 12 years of active duty. As she laced her steel-toed boots, she caught her reflection in the small mirror mounted above the dresser. The face looking back at her was weathered and tired, marked by sun and sand and the kind of exhaustion that came not from physical labor, but from having your purpose stripped away piece by piece. The transition from combat soldier to janitor hadn't been her choice. After taking shrapnel to her left shoulder during a Taliban ambush outside Kabul, Maria had been medically retired from active duty despite her protests that the injury wouldn't affect her shooting. The Army doctors disagreed, citing reduced range of motion and chronic pain that could compromise her effectiveness in the field. The bureaucratic machine had processed her discharge with the same cold efficiency it used for equipment requisitions, reducing her from Staff Sergeant Vasquez, elite sniper, to just another veteran looking for work. Fort Meridian had been her lifeline when civilian life proved unbearable. The base was home to the Army's most advanced weapons research facility, where scientists and engineers developed the next generation of military technology. It was also, according to the official reports, one of the most secure installations in the country, protected by multiple layers of surveillance, armed guards, and protocols designed to prevent any unauthorized access to classified materials. For Maria, it represented a chance to remain connected to the military world that had defined her adult life, even if that connection was tenuous at best. The janitorial position had been the only opening available when she applied 6 months after her discharge. The base commander, Colonel James Hartford, had barely glanced at her military record during the brief interview, focusing instead on her ability to pass a security clearance check and work unsupervised during night shifts. Her combat experience, her marksmanship awards, her years of service in hostile environments, none of it mattered for pushing a mop and emptying wastebaskets. She was just another body to fill a position that nobody else wanted. Maria's supervisor was a civilian contractor named Bob Peterson, a man in his 50s who had never served in the military but somehow felt qualified to lecture her about proper cleaning procedures. Peterson treated all the janitorial staff like potential security risks, constantly reminding them that they were being watched. and that any breach of protocol would result in immediate termination and possible criminal charges. He seemed to take particular pleasure in assigning Maria the most degrading tasks, perhaps sensing that she had once held a position of respect and authority. The work itself was mind-numbing in its repetition. Each night, Maria followed the same route through the base, moving from building to building according to a schedule that had been designed to minimize her contact with sensitive areas and classified personnel. She cleaned the administrative offices first, where clerks and logistics specialists pushed papers and managed supply chains. Then she moved to the medical facility, where doctors and nurses treated everything from routine checkups to combat injuries. The mess hall came next, followed by the barracks, the gymnasium, and finally the research complex. It was in the research complex that Maria's military instincts remained most alert. The building housed laboratories where scientists worked on classified projects that could revolutionize modern warfare. The security was tighter here, with armed guards at every entrance and surveillance cameras that tracked her every movement. But even in this highly monitored environment, Maria noticed things that others missed. She saw which researchers worked late into the night, which laboratories required special clearances, and which areas were off-limits even to the cleaning staff. Dr. Amanda Foster was one of the few people on the base who treated Maria with anything resembling respect. The nuclear physicist had been working at Fort Meridian for 3 years, leading a team that developed advanced weapon systems for the Department of Defense. Unlike most of the scientific staff, Dr. Foster actually acknowledged Maria's presence, occasionally asking about her military service and expressing genuine interest in her experiences overseas. During their brief conversations, Maria learned that Dr. Foster's work involved some of the most sensitive research being conducted at the facility, including projects that could change the balance of power in global conflicts. The other person who seemed to notice Maria was Sergeant First Class Danny Rodriguez, a military police officer who worked the night security detail. Rodriguez was younger than Maria, probably in his mid-20s, but he carried himself with the confidence of someone who had seen combat. He often stopped to chat during her rounds, sharing stories about his deployment to Iraq and asking for advice about military life. Maria appreciated his company, even though she sensed that his friendliness might be part of his security duties rather than genuine personal interest. Most of the other personnel at Fort Meridian treated Maria as if she were part of the furniture. Officers walked past her without acknowledgement. Enlisted personnel ignored her presence, and civilian contractors seemed to view her as a potential threat to be monitored rather than a fellow human being. The isolation was perhaps the hardest part of her new life, harder even than the physical demands of the job or the blow to her pride. In combat, she had been part of a team, connected to something larger than herself. Now she was just another invisible worker, forgotten by the very institution she had served with distinction. The pay was enough to cover her basic needs, but barely. Maria lived in a small apartment off base, a one-bedroom unit in a complex that housed mostly other veterans and low-income families. The walls were thin, the heating system unreliable, and the neighborhood had seen better days. But it was hers, and after months of temporary housing and uncertainty, having a permanent address felt like a small victory. She spent her evenings reading military history, watching the news, and maintaining the physical fitness routine that had kept her alive in Afghanistan. Sleep was often elusive, interrupted by dreams that transported her back to the mountains of the Hindu Kush or the dusty streets of Kabul. In these dreams, she was still a sniper, still trusted with the lives of her fellow soldiers, still valued for her unique skills and unwavering dedication. She would wake with her heart racing, momentarily confused by the unfamiliar surroundings before reality crashed back down around her. The transition from warrior to custodian was a daily reminder of how quickly everything could change, how a single piece of shrapnel could redirect the entire course of a life, Maria's military training had taught her patience and observation, skills that proved surprisingly useful in her civilian role. She learned the rhythms of the base, the patterns of movement that revealed which areas were truly sensitive and which were just routine operations. She memorized the faces of everyone who worked in the research complex, noting who belonged and who might be out of place. Most importantly, she maintained the situational awareness that had kept her alive through 3 combat tours, even though her current environment seemed far removed from any real danger. The irony wasn't lost on her that the same institution that had deemed her unfit for military service now trusted her with access to some of its most classified facilities. As a janitor, she moved through areas that would require extensive security clearances for other personnel, her presence so unremarkable that she had become effectively invisible. The cleaning cart that she pushed through the corridors each night was her camouflage, allowing her to observe and learn without drawing attention or suspicion. What Maria didn't know was that her unique combination of combat, experience, and unrestricted access would soon make her the only person capable of stopping a catastrophic attack on American soil. The skills that the Army had dismissed as obsolete would prove to be exactly what was needed when Fort Meridian faced its greatest threat. And the janitor that everyone ignored would become the unlikely hero who saved not just the base, but potentially thousands of innocent lives across the country. The call came at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, jarring Maria from a restless sleep filled with echoes of distant gunfire. Her supervisor's voice crackled through the cheap phone speaker with unusual urgency, something that immediately set her combat-trained instincts on high alert. Bob Peterson never called the night shift workers directly, preferring to communicate through written schedules and terse notes left on their equipment carts. "Vasquez, I need you to come in early tonight. There's been a situation with the regular cleaning crew in Building 7, and we're short-handed. Report to the main facility at 1800 hours instead of your usual shift." Peterson's tone carried an edge that Maria had never heard before, a nervous energy that seemed at odds with his typically bureaucratic demeanor. Building 7 housed the building most sensitive research laboratories at Fort Meridian, including Dr. Foster's nuclear weapons development program. It was also the one facility where Maria's cleaning duties were severely restricted, limited to common areas and administrative offices, while the actual laboratories remained off-limits to all but the most highly cleared personnel. The sudden need for additional cleaning staff in that particular building struck Maria as highly unusual, especially given the facility's stringent security protocols. Maria arrived at the base 3 hours early, using the extra time to observe the unusual activity surrounding Building 7. Military police vehicles were positioned at strategic points around the perimeter, their occupants alert and heavily armed. She counted at least 12 additional security personnel beyond the normal complement, all of them carrying automatic weapons and wearing body armor that suggested they were expecting serious trouble. As she approached the main entrance, Maria noticed that the standard ID scanners had been supplemented with additional biometric equipment. A guard she didn't recognize checked her credentials twice before allowing her to proceed, studying her. Faced with the intense scrutiny of someone looking for potential threats, the atmosphere was tense in a way that reminded her of the hours before a major operation in Afghanistan, when everyone knew that danger was imminent, but nobody could predict exactly how it would manifest. Inside Building 7, Maria was met by a woman she had never seen before, someone who introduced herself only as Agent Sarah Mitchell from an unspecified federal agency. Mitchell was in her 30s, with the kind of alert posture and careful speech patterns that marked her as law enforcement or intelligence community. She wore a conservative business suit that couldn't quite conceal the outline of a shoulder holster, and her eyes moved constantly, cataloging potential threats and escape routes with professional efficiency. "Ms. Vasquez, I understand you're here to assist with enhanced cleaning protocols in the restricted areas. Before we proceed, I need to brief you on some additional security measures that will be in effect during tonight's operations. Mitchell's voice was crisp and authoritative, carrying the unmistakable tone of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. The briefing took place in a small conference room that Maria had cleaned dozens of times, but never actually entered for any official purpose. Mitchell explained that a security review was taking place throughout the facility, requiring deep cleaning and inspection of areas that were normally inaccessible to maintenance personnel. Maria would be escorted at all times by armed guards and would be required to follow specific procedures for handling any materials or equipment she encountered. What Mitchell didn't explain was why a routine security review would require such extraordinary measures, or why Maria had been specifically selected for this assignment when there were other custodial workers with higher security clearances. The questions nagged at Maria's tactical mind, reminding her of mission briefings in combat zones where critical information was often withheld for operational security reasons. The first sign that something was seriously wrong came when Maria was escorted to Laboratory Complex C, a section of Building 7 that she had never been allowed to enter during her 8 months at the facility. The laboratories were larger and more sophisticated than anything she had seen during her limited access to other research areas, filled with equipment that looked more like science fiction than military hardware. Dr. Foster was waiting in Laboratory Complex C, but she looked nothing like the confident scientist Maria had come to know during their brief conversations. Foster's face was pale and drawn, marked by the kind of exhaustion that came from working under extreme pressure for extended periods. Her usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, with coffee stains on her lab coat and dark circles under her eyes that suggested she hadn't slept in days. "Maria, thank you for coming in early. I know this is unusual, but we're dealing with some very sensitive materials that require special handling procedures." Foster's voice was steady, but Maria noticed the way her hands trembled slightly as she gestured toward a series of sealed containers arranged on a central workstation. The containers were unlike anything Maria had encountered during her regular cleaning duties. They were made of a metallic material that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, with digital displays showing readings that meant nothing to her, but clearly carried great significance for Dr. Foster. Each container was marked with symbols and warnings in multiple languages, indicating that whatever was inside posed serious dangers to anyone who handled them improperly. As Maria began her assigned cleaning tasks, she became aware of a conversation taking place in the adjacent laboratory between Agent Mitchell and a man she recognized as Colonel Hartford, the base commander. Their voices were low and urgent, but Maria's military training had taught her to listen carefully to background conversations that might contain tactical intelligence. "The missing components were definitely taken from this facility, Colonel," Hartford was saying, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Someone with high-level access used the security maintenance window to remove 3 fusion triggers and approximately 2 kilograms of weapons-grade plutonium." Agent Mitchell's response was even more chilling. "Our intelligence indicates that the materials are being assembled into an improvised nuclear device somewhere within a 50-mile radius of this facility. If the perpetrators succeed in completing the weapon, they'll have enough destructive power to level half the state of Nevada." Maria's hands continued their methodical cleaning motions, but her mind was racing with the implications of what she had just heard. Someone had stolen nuclear materials from Fort Meridian, materials that were now being used to construct a weapon of mass destruction. The enhanced security measures, the unusual cleaning assignments, the presence of federal agents, it all made sense now. The facility was in crisis mode, trying to determine how the theft had occurred and who was responsible. The conversation continued with details that painted an even more disturbing picture. The theft had been conducted with inside knowledge of the facility's security protocols, suggesting that someone with legitimate access had betrayed their trust. Worse yet, the missing materials had been discovered only 3 days ago, meaning that the perpetrators had a significant head start in their efforts to weaponize the stolen plutonium. We've narrowed the list of suspects to 17 individuals. With the necessary clearances and access, Mitchell was explaining. But that includes some of our most trusted personnel, people who have served with distinction for years. Colonel Hartford's response revealed his personal anguish over the situation. These are people I've worked with, people I've trusted with the most sensitive materials in our inventory. The idea that one of them could be capable of this kind of betrayal is almost impossible to accept. As Maria processed this information, she began to notice other details that had initially escaped her attention. The laboratory where she was working had clearly been subjected to intensive forensic examination, with evidence markers and measurement equipment still in place from what must have been a comprehensive investigation. Certain workstations had been completely dismantled, their components presumably removed for analysis by federal investigators. Dr. Foster approached Maria during a brief break in the conversations from the adjacent laboratory, her demeanor even more strained than before. "Maria, I need to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly. During your cleaning rounds, over the past few months, have you noticed anything unusual? Any personnel working at odd hours, any equipment that seemed out of place, any conversations that struck you as strange?" The question confirmed Maria's growing suspicion that her assignment to Building 7 wasn't coincidental. Someone had decided that her status as an invisible custodial worker might have given her access to observations that others had missed. Her military background would have made her more likely to notice security anomalies and remember details that civilian workers might overlook. Maria thought carefully before responding, drawing on months of accumulated observations from her cleaning duties throughout the facility. "There have been a few things that seemed unusual, but I assumed they were just routine variations in the work schedule. Dr. Harrison from the materials engineering section has been working very late shifts, sometimes staying until 3 or 4 in the morning. And there's been some equipment moved between laboratories that didn't follow the normal protocols." Dr. Foster's expression grew even more serious as she absorbed this information. "Dr. Marcus Harrison is one of the people on our suspect list. He has the technical knowledge to weaponize the stolen materials, and his access credentials would have allowed him to remove them without triggering immediate alarms." The conversation was interrupted by Agent Mitchell, who emerged from the adjacent laboratory with Colonel Hartford and 2 other men Maria didn't recognize. One was wearing the uniform of a general officer, his chest decorated with ribbons that marked him as a veteran of multiple combat deployments. The other was in civilian clothes but carried himself with the bearing of someone accustomed to command authority. "Ms. Vasquez," Agent Mitchell addressed her directly, "we understand that you have extensive military experience, including combat deployments in Afghanistan. Given the current security situation, we'd like to ask for your assistance in a capacity that goes beyond your normal custodial duties." Maria felt her pulse quicken as she realized that her carefully constructed invisibility was about to be shattered. Whatever was happening at Fort Meridian had reached a point where even dismissed combat veterans were being called back into service, where janitors were being asked to become soldiers once again. The request came wrapped in official language and careful disclaimers, but Maria recognized it for what it was: a recruitment pitch delivered by people who were running out of options. Agent Mitchell led her to a secure briefing room where classified documents were spread across a conference table like pieces of a deadly puzzle that refused to come together. General Patricia Hawkins commanded the room with the presence of someone who had spent decades making life-and-death decisions under pressure. Her silver hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and her eyes held the kind of intensity that Maria remembered from her most respected commanding officers in Afghanistan. When she spoke, it was with the directness of a soldier addressing another soldier, cutting through the bureaucratic pretense that had defined most of Maria's interactions at Fort Meridian. Staff Sergeant Vasquez, your service record indicates that you were one of the most effective snipers in the Army's recent history. Your kill count, your precision under pressure, and your ability to operate independently in hostile territory are exactly the skills we need right now. General Hawkins gestured toward the documents on the table, which Maria could see included detailed personnel files and tactical assessments. Dr. Foster sat at the far end of the table, her laptop open, to what appeared to be a complex schematic diagram of some kind of nuclear device. The technical details were beyond Maria's understanding, but the accompanying photographs showed components that looked sophisticated and professionally assembled. Someone with serious technical knowledge and substantial resources was building a weapon that could kill thousands of people. The situation is more dire than we initially believed, Dr. Foster explained, her voice carrying the weight of terrible knowledge. Our analysis of the forensic evidence suggests that the stolen materials have been combined with additional components acquired from other sources. We're not dealing with a crude improvised device. This is a sophisticated nuclear weapon with an estimated yield of 15 kilotons. Agent Mitchell activated a wall-mounted display that showed a map of Nevada and the surrounding states, with concentric circles radiating out from Fort Meridian like ripples in a pond. The innermost circle encompassed the base itself, while the outermost ring reached as far as Las Vegas and Salt Lake City. Red dots marked population centers that would be affected by radioactive fallout if the weapon were detonated at various locations. Intelligence indicates that the device is being assembled somewhere within a 20-mile radius of this facility. Mitchell continued. The perpetrators have chosen this location for maximum psychological impact, attacking the heart of America's nuclear weapons research program would send a message that nowhere is truly safe from their reach. Colonel Hartford appeared even more haggard than he had during Maria's earlier observations, his uniform wrinkled and his eyes bloodshot from what had obviously been days without proper sleep. When he spoke, it was with the resignation of a commander who had watched his carefully constructed security measures crumble around him. We've been conducting intensive surveillance of all our suspects, but Dr. Harrison has disappeared. His apartment is empty, his vehicle is missing, and his credit cards haven't been used in 72 hours. Either he's the perpetrator and has gone underground, or he's been eliminated by the actual thieves to prevent him from revealing their identities. The briefing continued with details that painted an increasingly desperate picture. Federal agencies had deployed their most advanced detection equipment, searching for radiation signatures that might reveal the location of the stolen materials. Military units had established checkpoints on all major roads leading away from Fort Meridian, inspecting vehicles and questioning travelers with a thoroughness that was creating traffic backups for hundreds of miles. But the most troubling aspect of the investigation was the growing evidence that the theft had been planned and executed by professionals with extensive knowledge of American nuclear security protocols. The timing of the heist, the specific materials that had been targeted, and the sophisticated methods used to bypass multiple layers of protection all suggested that foreign intelligence services were involved. We have reason to believe that a hostile nation-state is behind this operation, General Hawkins revealed, her voice dropping to a tone that made the information feel even more ominous. The goal isn't just to acquire nuclear materials, it's to demonstrate that American security can be penetrated and exploited by foreign operatives working within our own institutions. Maria listened to the briefing with growing unease, not because of the magnitude of the threat, but because of the way the officials were looking at her. She recognized the expression from her combat days, the look that commanders got when they were about to ask soldiers to undertake missions that had very low probability of success and very high probability of casualties. Agent Mitchell finally revealed the true purpose of the meeting. Ms. Vasquez, we need someone who can operate independently. Someone who understands military tactics and weapons systems. Someone who can blend into civilian environments without attracting attention. Your janitorial position here has given you intimate knowledge of the facility's layout and personnel, knowledge that could be crucial in identifying how the theft was accomplished. The request was both flattering and terrifying. After 8 months of being treated as invisible and irrelevant, Maria was suddenly being asked to take on responsibilities that could determine the fate of thousands of people. The irony wasn't lost on her that the same military establishment that had deemed her unfit for combat duty was now asking her to risk her life in service to her country once again. What exactly are you asking me to do? Maria's question was direct, cutting through the careful language and diplomatic phrasing to get to the heart of the matter. Dr. Foster answered with the bluntness of a scientist stating facts. We want you to help us identify the insider who made this theft possible. Someone with access to the most secure areas of this facility, provided the perpetrators with detailed information about our security protocols, shift schedules, and storage procedures. We believe that person is still on the base, possibly still actively supporting the operation. General Hawkins elaborated on the tactical aspects of what they were proposing. Your cleaning duties give you access to areas and conversations that are normally restricted. People talk freely around custodial workers, assuming that they're not paying attention or don't understand the significance of what they're hearing. We need you to be our eyes and ears, gathering intelligence about who might have the knowledge and motivation to betray their country. The plan they outlined was both simple and extraordinarily dangerous. Maria would continue her regular cleaning duties while conducting covert surveillance of personnel who had access to the stolen materials. She would report any suspicious activities, unusual conversations, or security anomalies that might indicate ongoing cooperation with the perpetrators. Most importantly, she would use her combat experience to identify potential threats in security, vulnerabilities that trained investigators might miss. There's something else, Agent Mitchell added, her tone growing even more serious. We have intelligence suggesting that the nuclear device isn't just being assembled, it's being prepared for immediate deployment. The perpetrators may be planning to detonate it within the next 48 hours, possibly targeting this facility itself or a nearby population center. The revelation sent a chill through Maria that had nothing to do with the air conditioning in the secure briefing room. The idea that terrorists were preparing to detonate a nuclear weapon on American soil, possibly within miles of where she was sitting, transformed the abstract threat into something immediate and personal. Colonel Hartford leaned forward, his expression grave. If they succeed in detonating this device, it won't just be a local catastrophe. The psychological impact of a successful nuclear attack on American soil would fundamentally change our national security posture and our relationship with hostile nations around the world. We cannot allow that to happen. Maria found herself thinking about the photograph on her nightstand, the image of her with Delta Company in Afghanistan before everything had gone wrong. Those soldiers had trusted her to watch their backs, to eliminate threats before they could harm innocent people. Now she was being asked to take on a similar responsibility, but the stakes were exponentially higher and the enemy was operating within America itself. I need to understand something, Maria said, looking directly at General Hawkins. 8 months ago, the Army decided that my combat injuries made me unfit for military service. Now you're asking me to take on a mission that requires exactly the same skills that were supposedly compromised by those injuries. Why should I trust an institution that dismissed my capabilities when it was convenient, but now wants to exploit them when it's desperate? The question hung in the air like smoke from a battlefield, challenging not just the immediate request, but the entire system that had brought them to this point. General Hawkins met Maria's gaze without flinching, acknowledging the legitimacy of the challenge with the respect that one combat veteran owed to another. Because sometimes the system gets it wrong, Staff Sergeant. And sometimes the people who the system overlooks are exactly the ones who end up saving it from its own mistakes. Maria's acceptance of the mission came without fanfare or ceremony, delivered with the same matter-of-fact tone she had once used to confirm target acquisitions in the mountains of Afghanistan. The weight of responsibility settled on her shoulders, like familiar combat gear, bringing with it a sense of purpose that had been absent from her life since her medical discharge. Within an hour of leaving the briefing room, she was equipped with covert communication devices and surveillance equipment disguised as standard cleaning supplies. The modified cleaning cart that became her mobile command center looked identical to the one she had been pushing for 8 months, but its hidden compartments contained sophisticated listening devices, cameras smaller than shirt buttons, and a secure satellite communication system that could reach federal agencies anywhere in the world. Agent Mitchell had trained her on the equipment with the efficiency of someone who had conducted similar briefings dozens of times, emphasizing that her success would depend on maintaining her invisible status while gathering intelligence that traditional investigative methods had failed to uncover. Her first target was Dr. Marcus Harrison, the materials engineering specialist whose late-night work sessions had caught Maria's attention during her regular cleaning rounds. Harrison's laboratory was located in the most secure section of Building 7, requiring multiple biometric scans and escort protocols that made casual observation nearly impossible. But Maria's new status as a special investigative asset had given her access to areas that had previously been off-limits, allowing her to observe Harrison's work patterns with unprecedented detail. The surveillance began during her regular night shift, but with heightened awareness of every detail that might reveal Harrison's involvement in the theft. Maria positioned herself in an adjacent storage room, where she could monitor the entrance to Harrison's laboratory through a concealed camera while maintaining her cover as a custodial worker organizing cleaning supplies. The waiting required the same patience she had once employed during sniper missions, remaining motionless for hours while scanning for targets that might appear for only seconds. Harrison arrived at his laboratory at 11:47 p.m., nearly 4 hours after his official shift had ended. His behavior immediately struck Maria as suspicious. Instead of using the main entrance that would have been monitored by security cameras, he accessed the facility through a maintenance corridor that was normally used only by repair technicians. The route he chose suggested intimate knowledge of the building's security blind spots, exactly the kind of information that would have been necessary to remove nuclear materials without detection. Through the concealed camera, Maria watched Harrison work with materials and equipment that didn't match any of the official research projects listed in the facility's daily reports. He was assembling what appeared to be a sophisticated electronic device, working with components that looked more like weapons technology than scientific instruments. His movements were careful and deliberate, suggesting familiarity with procedures that required extreme precision to avoid catastrophic failure. The breakthrough came when Harrison received a phone call that he answered using a device that Maria recognized as an encrypted satellite phone, equipment that wasn't part of the laboratory's standard communication systems. She adjusted her surveillance equipment to record both sides of the conversation, using directional microphones that could penetrate the laboratory's soundproofing without detection. "Phase 2 is complete," Harrison was saying, his voice carrying the tension of someone operating under extreme pressure. "The initiator components are assembled and tested. We're ready to proceed with final integration as soon as you deliver the primary payload." The voice on the other end of the call was distorted by encryption, but Maria could make out enough words to understand that Harrison was coordinating with someone outside the facility. References to delivery schedules and extraction protocols suggested that the nuclear device was being assembled at a remote location, with Harrison providing technical expertise and specialized components that couldn't be acquired through normal channels. The security review is creating complications, Harrison continued. They've brought in federal investigators and increased surveillance throughout the facility. We need to accelerate our timeline before they discover the scope of our operation. Maria felt her pulse quicken as she realized that Harrison was aware of the investigation that was supposed to be secret. Either he had access to classified briefings about the federal response, or someone else within the facility was providing him with intelligence about the government's efforts to stop the attack. The possibility of multiple conspirators within Fort Meridian's trusted personnel made the situation exponentially more dangerous. The conversation ended with arrangements for a meeting that would take place off base, at coordinates that Harrison read from a written note rather than speaking. From memory, Maria memorized the location, a set of longitude and latitude readings that placed the meeting point approximately 15 miles northeast of Fort Meridian, in a section of desert that was remote enough to avoid casual observation but accessible by vehicle. As Harrison concluded his late-night work and prepared to leave the laboratory, Maria made a decision that would fundamentally change the nature of her mission. Instead of simply reporting her observations to Agent Mitchell and waiting for federal agencies to take action, she decided to follow Harrison to his meeting and gather intelligence about the full scope of the conspiracy. Her sniper training had taught her the value of reconnaissance that went beyond passive observation, and her instincts told her that time was running out for conventional investigative approaches. Maria waited until Harrison had cleared the facility before beginning her own departure, using maintenance corridors and service exits that would allow her to leave Fort Meridian without appearing on security logs. Her personal vehicle was a 10-year-old pickup truck that had seen better days, but its nondescript appearance and reliable engine made it perfect for surveillance operations in rural Nevada. She had modified it herself with equipment acquired through military surplus channels, including night vision systems and communication gear that rivaled anything used by federal law enforcement. The drive to the meeting location took her through increasingly desolate terrain, past abandoned mining operations and military testing ranges that had been used for decades to evaluate weapons too dangerous to test near populated areas. The landscape was moonlit and eerily beautiful, marked by rock formations that cast dramatic shadows across valleys that rarely saw human visitors. It was exactly the kind of environment where conspirators could operate without fear of detection by routine patrols or civilian witnesses. Maria positioned her vehicle on a ridge overlooking the coordinates that Harrison had mentioned during his phone conversation, using the elevation advantage to observe the meeting site through military-grade binoculars. The location was an abandoned gas station that had probably been built to serve the mining industry decades earlier, its concrete building and rusted fuel pumps creating an appropriately desolate setting for clandestine activities. Harrison arrived, first parking his vehicle behind the building where it would be hidden from casual observation by anyone traveling on the nearby access road. He waited with the nervous energy of someone who was operating outside his normal area of expertise, checking his watch repeatedly and scanning the horizon for signs of his contact. Maria noted that he was carrying a metal briefcase that hadn't been visible during his departure from Fort Meridian, suggesting that he had made a stop to retrieve materials or equipment between leaving the base and arriving at the meeting site. The second vehicle appeared exactly on schedule, approaching from the opposite direction and using its headlights to signal its arrival, according to what was obviously a prearranged protocol. The driver was a woman Maria didn't recognize, someone who moved with the confidence and tactical awareness of professional military or intelligence training. She was accompanied by two men who positioned themselves as perimeter security while she conducted her business with Harrison, suggesting that this was a sophisticated operation with multiple layers of operational security. The meeting itself was brief and businesslike, focused on the exchange of the briefcase Harrison had been carrying for a similar container that the woman had brought. Maria used her long-range surveillance equipment to document the license plates, physical descriptions, and operational procedures of all the participants, gathering intelligence that would allow federal agencies to identify and track the conspiracy's members. But the most disturbing aspect of what Maria observed was the professionalism and coordination displayed by Harrison's contacts. These weren't amateur terrorists or domestic extremists operating with improvised equipment and minimal training. They were professionals who understood operational security, communications discipline, and tactical procedures at a level that suggested foreign intelligence or military training. The implications were terrifying. America was facing an attack planned and executed by hostile foreign operatives who had successfully infiltrated one of the country's most secure nuclear facilities. As the meeting concluded and the participants prepared to depart, Maria faced a critical decision that would determine the future course of her mission. She could return to Fort Meridian and report her observations to Agent Mitchell, providing the federal investigation with crucial intelligence about the conspiracy's scope and capabilities. Or she could continue her surveillance, following the unknown operatives to their base of operations where the nuclear device was presumably being assembled for deployment. The choice between safety and duty was one that Maria had faced many times during her combat tours, but never with stakes quite this high. If she made the wrong decision, thousands of innocent people might die in a nuclear attack that could have been prevented. If she made the right decision but executed it poorly, she might die alone in the Nevada desert without anyone knowing what she had discovered. Maria started her engine and began following the unknown operatives into the darkness. Trusting her combat instincts and her determination to protect innocent lives, regardless of the personal cost, the pursuit through the Nevada desert tested every surveillance technique Maria had learned during service, requiring her to maintain visual contact with the enemy operatives while staying far enough behind to avoid detection. The terrain worked in her favor, with rolling hills and sparse vegetation providing natural concealment for her vehicle. But the clear desert air also meant that headlights could be spotted from miles away. She drove without lights, using night vision equipment to navigate the rough terrain while keeping the enemy vehicle's taillights barely visible on the horizon. The operatives were following a route that avoided main highways and populated areas, using ranch roads and mining tracks that suggested intimate knowledge of the local geography. Their path took them deeper into the desert wilderness, past military warning signs and into areas that were officially designated as restricted airspace due to ongoing weapons testing. The choice of location was tactically sound. Any federal response would be complicated by the remote location and the presence of active military operations that could provide cover for their activities. After 40 minutes of careful pursuit, the enemy vehicle turned into what appeared to be an abandoned ranch complex, its buildings dark against the starlit sky. Maria parked her truck behind a rocky outcropping approximately half a mile from the site and continued her surveillance. On foot, carrying equipment that transformed her from a custodial worker into the combat reconnaissance specialist she had once been. The familiar weight of tactical gear felt natural after months of pushing cleaning carts, reminding her of capabilities that bureaucratic decisions had tried to eliminate but couldn't erase. The ranch buildings were more extensive than they had appeared from a distance, with multiple structures arranged around a central courtyard that provided natural security and fields of fire. Maria counted at least 6 vehicles parked in various locations, suggesting that the operation involved more personnel than she had initially suspected. The level of organization and resources indicated that this wasn't a hastily assembled terrorist cell, but a sophisticated intelligence operation that had been planned and funded by people with substantial resources. Using her sniper scope as a reconnaissance tool, Maria systematically surveyed the compound and identified what appeared to be the primary assembly area for the nuclear device. The largest building showed signs of recent modification, with new electrical systems and ventilation equipment that would be necessary for handling radioactive materials safely. Heavy equipment tracks in the dirt indicated that substantial machinery had been brought to the site, probably the specialized tools required for precision nuclear weapons assembly. The security arrangements around the compound were professional but not overwhelming, suggesting that the operatives were confident in their remote location and the secrecy of their operation. 2 guards patrolled the perimeter on foot, while others remained positioned at observation posts that provided overlapping fields of view. Maria noted their equipment and movement patterns, identifying weaknesses in their defensive posture that could be exploited if direct action became necessary. The breakthrough in her surveillance came when she observed Dr. Harrison emerging from the main assembly building, accompanied by a man she recognized from intelligence briefings as Viktor Petrov, a Russian nuclear engineer who had been suspected of selling technical expertise to hostile nations. Petrov's presence confirmed that this was indeed a foreign intelligence operation, not a domestic terrorist attack, and that the technical expertise behind the nuclear device came from someone with intimate knowledge of advanced weapons design. Through her directional listening equipment, Maria captured fragments of conversation that revealed the true scope of the threat facing America. The nuclear device wasn't just intended to cause massive casualties. It was designed to be detonated in cold ujil, a way that would contaminate a vast area with radioactive fallout, making parts of Nevada uninhabitable for decades. The psychological and economic impact would be devastating, potentially triggering a nuclear response that could escalate into global conflict. The primary device will be ready for deployment within 18 hours, Petrov was explaining to Harrison as they walked across the compound. The secondary effects will ensure that the contamination spreads far beyond the initial blast radius, creating an exclusion zone comparable to Chernobyl, but in the heart of American territory. Harrison's response revealed the full extent of his betrayal and the motivations that had driven him to commit treason against his own country. The payment arrangements are confirmed. Once the device is detonated, our extraction will be completed within 6 hours. The chaos and confusion will provide perfect cover for our departure. Maria realized that she was observing the final stages of an operation that had probably taken months or years to plan and execute. The nuclear materials stolen from Fort Meridian were being combined with additional components and expertise to create a weapon that would fundamentally change America's security landscape. The remote location and professional execution suggested that the perpetrators had confidence in their ability to complete the mission and escape before federal authorities could mount an effective response. As she continued her surveillance, Maria identified additional details that painted an increasingly dire picture. The compound included what appeared to be a communications center with satellite uplinks that could reach anywhere in the world, suggesting that the operation was being coordinated with foreign intelligence services in real time. Vehicle maintenance areas and fuel storage facilities indicated that the operatives were prepared for sustained operations, not just a single attack. Most troubling was the discovery of what appeared to be a delivery vehicle, a commercial truck, that had been modified with radiation shielding and specialized handling equipment for transporting the nuclear device to its target. The truck bore legitimate commercial markings and license plates that would allow it to travel through populated areas without attracting attention. The perfect camouflage for delivering a weapon of mass destruction to the heart of an American city. Maria's military training had taught her to assess enemy capabilities and intentions based on observed preparations, and everything she saw indicated that the attack was imminent. The operatives were conducting final equipment checks, loading supplies into vehicles, and performing other activities that suggested they were preparing to move to the operational phase of their mission. Time was running out for any intervention that might prevent the detonation. Using her secure communication equipment, Maria attempted to contact Agent Mitchell and report her discoveries. But the remote location and the enemy's electronic countermeasures were interfering with her transmissions. Static and interference made it impossible to establish reliable contact with Fort Meridian or federal agencies, leaving her isolated and unable to call for backup or coordinate a response with conventional forces. The realization that she was completely on her own brought back memories of situations in Afghanistan where communication failures had left her unit isolated and outnumbered, forced to make tactical decisions without higher guidance or support. The difference was that in Afghanistan, she had been part of a team with complementary skills and equipment. Here, she was a single individual facing a sophisticated enemy force that had the capability to inflict catastrophic damage on American soil. As Maria continued her surveillance, she began to formulate a plan that would draw on her unique combination of sniper skills and intimate knowledge of the enemy's preparations. The conventional approach would be to withdraw from the area and attempt to contact federal authorities, who could organize a coordinated response with military units and specialized equipment. But the communications difficulties and the remote location meant that any conventional response would take hours to organize and execute, time that the enemy might not provide. The alternative was to take direct action, using her sniper skills to disrupt the operation and prevent the nuclear device from being transported to its target. The plan would require her to neutralize key personnel and critical equipment from long range, using precision shooting to create enough chaos and confusion to delay the attack until federal forces could arrive. It was an extremely high-risk approach that could easily result in her death, but it might be the only way to prevent a nuclear attack on American soil. Maria spent the next hour conducting detailed reconnaissance of the compound, identifying critical targets and planning firing positions that would give her the best chance of success. The enemy's security arrangements were competent but not designed to defend against a skilled sniper operating from extended range. Their perimeter guards were focused on preventing ground assault rather than long-range precision fire, creating opportunities that she could exploit with careful timing and accurate shooting. The decision to take direct action crystallized when Maria observed the operatives beginning to load the nuclear device into the specially modified delivery truck. The activity around the vehicle indicated that they were preparing for immediate departure, probably planning to transport the weapon to its target under cover of darkness. Once the device left the compound, it would become exponentially more difficult to track and intercept, making this her last opportunity to prevent the attack. Maria selected a firing position on a ridge, approximately 800 yards from the compound, a distance that was well within her capabilities, but far enough to provide some protection from return fire. The elevation advantage gave her clear sight lines to critical targets, while making it difficult for the enemy to accurately determine her location. She began preparing her equipment for what would probably be the most important shooting of her career. Maria's rifle felt like a forgotten friend returning to her hands after months of forced separation. The weapon was her personal hunting rifle, a precision instrument that she had modified with military-grade optics and specialized ammunition during her years of active duty. It wasn't the custom sniper system she had used in Afghanistan, but it was familiar and reliable, capable of accurate fire at distances that would keep her beyond the range of the enemy's defensive weapons. The setup process required the same methodical precision she had once applied to elimination missions in hostile territory. Maria constructed a concealed firing position using natural rock formations and sparse desert vegetation, creating a hide that would be nearly invisible from the compound below. The night vision scope allowed her to observe targets clearly despite the darkness, while range-finding equipment provided exact distances to critical points throughout the enemy facility. Through her scope, Maria could see the nuclear device being carefully maneuvered into the back of the delivery truck by technicians wearing full radiation protection suits. The weapon itself was smaller than she had expected, roughly the size of a large refrigerator. but the elaborate handling procedures and specialized equipment surrounding it confirmed that this was indeed a functioning nuclear bomb capable of devastating destruction. The sight of American soil being prepared for nuclear attack by foreign operatives filled her with a cold fury that sharpened her focus to laser intensity. Viktor Petrov was directing the loading operation with the calm professionalism of someone who had handled similar weapons before, issuing instructions in accented English that carried clearly across the desert air. His presence confirmed that this wasn't an improvised operation, but a carefully planned attack executed by people with extensive technical knowledge and substantial resources. The Russians had successfully infiltrated America's most secure nuclear facility and were now preparing to use stolen materials against American targets. Dr. Harrison stood near the truck making final adjustments to what appeared to be a timing mechanism, his movements nervous but precise. Through her scope, Maria could see the sweat on his face despite the cool desert air, evidence of the enormous pressure he was operating under. The man who had once been trusted with America's most sensitive nuclear research was now actively participating in an attack that could kill thousands of innocent people and trigger a global nuclear crisis. The first shot had to be perfect. Maria's plan was to eliminate Petrov as the primary technical expert, then target Harrison to remove the American insider who had made the operation possible. After that, she would systematically disable critical equipment and vehicles to prevent the nuclear device from being transported to its target. The entire sequence had to be executed with flawless precision and timing, because once she revealed her position, the enemy would respond with overwhelming firepower. Maria controlled her breathing and heart rate using techniques learned through years of combat experience, entering the focused mental state that had made her one of the Army's most effective snipers. The crosshairs settled on Petrov's center mass as he bent over the nuclear device, adjusting some component that was critical to the weapon's functionality. At 800 yards, the bullet would take approximately 1 second to reach its target, requiring her to lead the moving target and compensate for wind drift across the desert terrain. The rifle's report echoed across the compound like thunder, followed immediately by the distinctive impact sound of a high-velocity bullet finding its target. Petrov collapsed instantly, his body crumpling against the side of the truck as the other operatives scrambled for cover and began scanning the surrounding terrain for the source of the attack. Maria was already working the rifle's bolt and acquiring her second target before the enemy had time to process what was happening. Harrison was running toward the main building when Maria's second shot caught him in the upper torso, spinning him around and dropping him face first into the dirt. The technical expertise that had enabled the nuclear theft was now eliminated, leaving the remaining operatives without the specialized knowledge needed to complete their mission. But Maria knew that the device itself might still be functional, and that other personnel might have sufficient training to transport and detonate it even without the primary experts. The compound erupted into chaos as guards opened fire in her general direction while other operatives attempted to complete the loading of the nuclear device. Muzzle flashes lit up the darkness as automatic weapons sprayed bullets across the ridge where Maria was positioned, forcing her to remain low while she selected her next targets. The enemy's response was professional and coordinated, indicating that they had trained for exactly this type of contingency. Maria's third shot targeted the driver of the delivery truck, eliminating him just as he was climbing into the cab to begin the transport mission. The bullet shattered the driver's side window and sent the operative tumbling back onto the ground, creating additional confusion and preventing the immediate departure of the nuclear weapon. But other personnel were already moving to take his place, demonstrating the redundancy and preparation that characterized the entire operation. The next critical target was the truck itself. Maria shifted her aim to the vehicle's engine block, using armor-piercing ammunition designed to penetrate hardened targets. The heavy bullets punched through the truck's hood and into the engine compartment, sending steam and coolant spraying into the air as the engine seized and died. Even if the operatives managed to start the vehicle, it wouldn't be capable of traveling the distance necessary to reach populated targets. Enemy return fire was intensifying as the operatives triangulated her position using muzzle flash detection and coordinated observation. Bullets whined overhead and chipped rock fragments from the boulders around her firing position, forcing Maria to relocate before the enemy could bring effective fire to bear. She moved to a secondary position 200 yards to the east, maintaining her elevation advantage while creating confusion about her exact location. From her new position, Maria could see operatives attempting to transfer the nuclear device to a backup vehicle, a process that required specialized equipment and careful handling to avoid damaging the weapon's delicate components. The transfer gave her additional opportunities to disrupt their operations, targeting both personnel and equipment to maximize the delay and confusion. Every minute she could buy might allow federal forces to arrive and complete the neutralization of the threat. Her next series of shots systematically destroyed critical equipment around the compound, targeting generators that provided power for the specialized handling gear and communications equipment that connected the operatives to their foreign handlers. Each shot was carefully planned to create maximum disruption while conserving ammunition for more critical targets. The compound's lights flickered and died as the power systems failed, plunging the facility into darkness that favored Maria's night vision equipment. The operatives' response evolved as they adapted to the sniper threat, with some personnel providing suppressive fire while others attempted to complete the mission despite the ongoing attack. Maria observed them using portable lights and backup equipment to continue the transfer of the nuclear device, demonstrating a level of preparation and determination that confirmed the critical nature of their operation. These weren't amateur terrorists who would abandon their mission at the first sign of resistance. They were professionals who would fight to the end to complete their objective. As the firefight continued, Maria began to notice additional vehicles approaching the compound from multiple directions, their headlights cutting through the darkness as they converged on the ranch complex. For a moment, she feared that enemy reinforcements were arriving to complete the mission, but the tactical formation and approach pattern suggested military or law enforcement units responding to her earlier distress signals. The cavalry was arriving, but Maria realized that federal forces might not be able to distinguish between her position and enemy positions in the darkness and chaos of the ongoing battle. She needed to identify herself clearly while continuing to prevent the nuclear device from being transported, a challenge that required precise timing and communication under the most difficult possible circumstances. Using her tactical radio, Maria broadcast on emergency frequencies that should be monitored by any federal response units in the area. "This is Staff Sergeant Maria Vasquez, former Army sniper, engaging hostile forces at abandoned ranch complex coordinates previously transmitted. Nuclear device on site. Repeat, nuclear device on site. I am positioned on a ridge 800 yards northeast of the main buildings. Do not engage in my position." The transmission was brief and clear, providing essential information for the incoming federal forces while maintaining operational security. Maria continued her systematic targeting of enemy personnel and equipment, using her sniper skills to create maximum disruption while federal units moved into position for a coordinated assault on the compound. The battle for the nuclear device was entering its final phase, with multiple federal agencies converging on the site while Maria maintained her solitary vigil on the ridge above. The outcome would determine whether America faced its first nuclear attack on domestic soil since World War II, or whether the dedication and skills of a dismissed veteran would prevent an unthinkable catastrophe. The arrival of federal forces transformed the tactical situation from a solitary sniper engagement into a complex multi-unit operation that required careful coordination to avoid friendly fire incidents. Maria watched through her scope as black SUVs and military vehicles established positions around the compound's perimeter, their occupants deploying with the precision of elite tactical units trained for exactly this type of crisis response. The distant sound of helicopter rotors indicated that air support was also en route, bringing heavy weapons and specialized equipment that could neutralize the remaining threats. "Agent," Mitchell's voice crackled through Maria's tactical radio, cutting through the static and background noise of the ongoing operation. "Vasquez, this is Mitchell. We have eyes on your position and are coordinating fire control to avoid blue-on-blue incidents. Continue engaging targets of opportunity, but be advised that we're preparing to assault the compound from multiple directions." The federal response was impressive in its scale and coordination, with units from multiple agencies converging on the site with equipment and expertise specifically designed for nuclear emergency situations. Maria could see personnel in radiation, protection suits preparing to secure the nuclear device, while tactical teams prepared to neutralize any remaining resistance from the enemy operatives. The sight of professional reinforcements arriving in overwhelming numbers should have been reassuring, but Maria's combat experience told her that the most dangerous moments of any operation often occurred during the transition between different phases of engagement. Through her scope, Maria observed the enemy operatives making increasingly desperate attempts to complete their mission, despite the deteriorating tactical situation. Several of them had taken positions in the main building and were preparing to make a final stand, using the nuclear device itself as both cover and leverage in what was essentially a suicide mission. The psychological profile of foreign intelligence operatives suggested that they would rather die fighting than be captured and interrogated by American authorities. The most dangerous development was the appearance of what appeared to be a dead man's switch in the hands of an operative Maria didn't recognize. A bearded man who had emerged from the main building, carrying a device that could potentially trigger the nuclear weapon if he was killed or incapacitated. The existence of such a mechanism meant that any assault on the compound carried the risk of detonating the very weapon that federal forces were trying to secure, creating an impossible tactical dilemma. "Mitchell, I have eyes on a potential dead man's switch," Maria transmitted, her voice steady despite the enormous implications of what she was observing. Bearded male, approximately 40 years old, positioned near the nuclear device. Any direct assault could trigger detonation. The radio fell silent for several seconds as federal commanders processed this information and revised their tactical plans accordingly. The presence of a dead man's switch meant that conventional assault techniques were no longer viable, requiring a more sophisticated approach that could neutralize the threat without triggering the nuclear device. Maria realized that her sniper position might be the only asset capable of eliminating the operator without giving him time to activate the trigger mechanism. "Vasquez, we need you to take that shot," Mitchell's voice returned with the weight of terrible responsibility. "Our tactical teams can't get close enough without risking detonation. You're our only option for a clean elimination that won't trigger the device." The shot Mitchell was requesting represented the most challenging target of Maria's career, requiring her to eliminate a moving target at extended range, while he was partially concealed behind cover and surrounded by other personnel. The margin for error was essentially zero. A miss or a non-fatal hit could result in the immediate detonation of a nuclear weapon that would kill not only the enemy operatives, but also the federal agents and military personnel who had come to stop them. Maria studied the target through her scope, analyzing his movement patterns and identifying the brief moments when he exposed himself to potential sniper fire. The bearded operative was clearly aware of the sniper threat and was using cover effectively, but his need to maintain visual contact with the nuclear device and coordinate with other personnel created opportunities that a skilled marksman could exploit. The shot would require perfect timing and absolute precision under the most stressful conditions imaginable. The wind had picked up since the beginning of the engagement, creating additional variables that Maria had to calculate into her firing solution. Desert winds were notoriously unpredictable, capable of sudden shifts in direction and velocity that could throw off even the most carefully planned shots. She used her military training to read environmental indicators, the movement of dust, the behavior of sparse vegetation, the way sound carried across the terrain, to predict wind patterns and compensate accordingly. "Target acquired," Maria transmitted, settling into her final firing position with the rifle braced against solid rock for maximum stability, waiting for an optimal shot opportunity. The bearded operative moved into the open for approximately 3 seconds as he gestured to other personnel near the nuclear device, providing Maria with the clearest shot opportunity she was likely to get. The crosshairs settled on the center of his head, the only target that would guarantee instantaneous incapacitation without giving him time to trigger the deadman switch. At this range and under these conditions, it was a shot that even experienced snipers would consider extremely difficult. Maria's breathing slowed to the controlled rhythm that had carried her through dozens of successful engagements in Afghanistan, her heart rate dropping as her body entered the focused state that made precision shooting possible under extreme stress. The rifle felt like an extension of her body, perfectly balanced and familiar despite the months that had passed since her last precision shot. The trigger broke cleanly with the smooth pressure that separated professional marksmen from amateur shooters. The bullet's flight time gave Maria a brief moment to observe the compound and prepare for the enemy's response to losing their deadman switch operator. The impact was immediately visible through her scope, a perfect headshot that dropped the bearded operative instantly, sending the trigger device spinning away from his lifeless hands to shatter against the concrete floor. The nuclear weapon remained stable and secure, no longer held hostage by the threat of manual detonation. Federal tactical teams immediately began their assault on the compound, moving with coordinated precision that had been impossible while the deadman switch remained active. Stun grenades exploded in brilliant flashes that temporarily blinded and disoriented the remaining operatives, while heavily armed agents moved through the buildings with systematic efficiency. The sound of automatic weapons fire echoed across the desert as the final resistance was eliminated with overwhelming firepower. Maria continued providing overwatch from her elevated position, using her scope to identify any remaining threats and guide the federal assault teams toward pockets of resistance that might not be visible from ground level. Her sniper training had taught her the value of maintaining situational awareness even after achieving primary objectives, because enemy forces often retained the capability to inflict casualties even during the final stages of defeat. The securing of the nuclear device required specialized personnel with expertise in disarming improvised nuclear weapons, a process that took nearly an hour despite the elimination of active resistance. Maria watched through her scope as technicians in full radiation protection suits carefully examined the weapon, using detection equipment and technical manuals to understand its construction and ensure that it couldn't be accidentally triggered during transport. The sight of American experts successfully securing a nuclear weapon that had been intended for use against American targets provided a sense of closure that had been missing from many of her combat experiences. "Vasquez, this is General Hawkins." A new voice came through her radio as the immediate crisis began to wind down. "Outstanding work. Your actions tonight prevented what could have been the worst terrorist attack in American history." The praise felt surreal after months of being treated as invisible and irrelevant, a reminder of the skills and dedication that had never actually disappeared despite bureaucratic decisions about her fitness for duty. Maria remained in position until federal forces had completely secured the compound and confirmed that no additional threats remained, maintaining the professional standards that had defined her military career, even when that career had seemed to be over. As the operation concluded and federal personnel began the complex process of evidence collection and site security, Maria finally descended from her ridge position to rejoin the world of official recognition and institutional authority. The transition from solitary sniper to part of a larger operation felt familiar from her combat deployments, but the significance of what had been prevented made this mission unique in her experience. The nuclear device that could have killed thousands of innocent Americans was now secure in federal custody, its deadly potential neutralized by the combined efforts of intelligence agencies, military units, and one dismissed veteran who had refused to accept that her service to her country was finished. The compound in the early morning light revealed the full scope of the operation that Maria had helped to disrupt, transforming what had seemed like an abandoned ranch into an obviously sophisticated intelligence facility. Federal investigators moved through the buildings with methodical precision, documenting equipment and materials that painted a disturbing picture of foreign infiltration into America's most sensitive nuclear programs. The scale of the conspiracy was far larger than anyone had initially suspected, involving multiple foreign operatives, stolen military technology, and resources that could only have come from a hostile nation-state. Maria found herself at the center of a carefully choreographed debriefing process that involved representatives from multiple federal agencies, each seeking to understand different aspects of her surveillance and engagement with the enemy operatives. Agent Mitchell led the initial questioning, focusing on the intelligence Maria had gathered during her reconnaissance of Dr. Harrison's activities and her subsequent pursuit of the conspirators to their desert compound. The information she provided filled critical gaps in the federal investigation, explaining how the nuclear materials had been stolen and revealing the sophisticated support network that had made the operation possible. Your observations about Dr. Harrison's late-night activities were the breakthrough we needed, Mitchell explained as they walked through the compound's main assembly building. Without your reports about his unusual work patterns and unauthorized equipment usage, we might never have identified him as the primary insider threat. The assembly building itself was a testament to the resources and planning that had gone into the nuclear attack. Sophisticated machinery for handling radioactive materials filled the space, along with technical manuals and computer systems that contained detailed information about American nuclear security protocols. Federal experts were already analyzing the equipment to determine how much classified information had been compromised and what other facilities might be at risk from similar infiltration attempts. Dr. Harrison's body lay covered by a tarp near the building's entrance, a reminder of the human cost of betrayal and the consequences of choosing foreign loyalty over American citizenship. Maria felt no satisfaction in his death, only the grim recognition that his technical expertise and access to classified materials had nearly enabled a catastrophic attack on American soil. The investigation would eventually reveal his motivations and the process by which foreign intelligence services had recruited him. But for now his betrayal served as a stark warning about the vulnerability of trusted personnel to enemy recruitment. Victor Petrov's presence at the compound confirmed the international nature of the conspiracy and the level of technical sophistication that foreign adversaries were willing to deploy against American targets. His body was being examined by federal forensics experts, who hoped to learn more about his background and the intelligence network that had supported the operation. The fact that such a high-value Russian nuclear expert had been willing to personally oversee the assembly of the weapon demonstrated the importance that hostile nations placed on successfully attacking American nuclear facilities. General Hawkins arrived at the compound as the sun was rising, her helicopter landing in a cloud of dust that temporarily obscured the ongoing investigation. She moved through the site with the confident bearing of someone who had dealt with nuclear crises before, asking pointed questions about the weapon's capabilities and the intelligence value of the materials that had been recovered. When she finally approached Maria, It was with the respectful acknowledgement that one combat veteran owed to another. Staff Sergeant Vasquez, your actions last night prevented what intelligence analysts are calling the most serious nuclear threat to American soil since the Cuban Missile Crisis, General Hawkins said, her voice carrying the weight of official recognition. The weapon that was being assembled here had the capability to contaminate hundreds of square miles and cause casualties in the tens of thousands. The technical briefing that followed revealed details about the nuclear device that made Maria realize how close America had come to experiencing its first terrorist nuclear attack. The weapon had been designed not just for maximum casualties, but for maximum psychological impact, incorporating features that would have spread radioactive contamination far beyond the initial blast zone. The long-term effects would have made large areas uninhabitable for decades, creating a permanent reminder of America's vulnerability to nuclear terrorism. The device was approximately 18 hours away from completion when your intervention disrupted the final assembly process. Dr. Foster explained, having arrived with a team of nuclear weapons experts to assess the threat. Our analysis indicates that the operatives were planning to transport it to Las Vegas for detonation during a major convention that would have maximized casualties and media coverage. The revelation that Las Vegas had been the intended target added another dimension to the horror that had been prevented. The city's dense population and symbolic importance as an entertainment destination would have made it the perfect target for terrorists seeking to inflict maximum psychological damage on American society. The attack would have killed thousands immediately and contaminated one of America's most famous cities, sending shock waves through the economy and fundamentally altering the nation's sense of security. Colonel Hartford appeared at the compound, looking haggard but relieved, his earlier fears about institutional betrayal now validated by the evidence of Harrison's treachery. He approached Maria with something approaching reverence, clearly struggling to reconcile the dismissed janitor he had known with the combat veteran who had prevented a nuclear catastrophe. Captain Vasquez, he began, using her former military rank rather than treating her as civilian support staff, I owe you an apology for the way you've been treated at Fort Meridian. Your skills and dedication should never have been dismissed, and your country owes you a debt that can never be fully repaid. The apology felt hollow after months of being treated as invisible and irrelevant, but Maria recognized that it represented a genuine acknowledgement of institutional failure. The military bureaucracy that had deemed her unfit for service had been forced to confront the reality that their evaluation had been both wrong and potentially catastrophic. Without her combat skills and analytical abilities, the nuclear attack would have succeeded, killing thousands of Americans and triggering a crisis that could have led to global conflict. Agent Mitchell provided additional details about the scope of the conspiracy as federal investigators continued their work throughout the compound. The operation had been planned for over 2 years, with foreign intelligence services carefully recruiting American personnel and establishing the infrastructure necessary to steal nuclear materials and weaponize them for terrorist attacks. Harrison had been just one part of a larger network that included other compromised personnel at sensitive facilities across the country. We're conducting security reviews at 17 other military installations based on intelligence recovered from this site, Mitchell explained. The foreign operatives had detailed information about security protocols and personnel at facilities that house nuclear weapons, missile systems, and advanced research programs. This was a systematic attempt to penetrate America's most sensitive defense infrastructure. The investigation was also revealing disturbing information about the timeline and scope of foreign infiltration efforts. Evidence found at the compound suggested that similar operations were being planned against other targets, including nuclear power plants and military research facilities. The successful disruption of this attack had prevented not just immediate casualties, but potentially a series of coordinated strikes that could have crippled America's nuclear deterrent and energy Infrastructure. Maria's role in preventing the attack was being documented for official reports that would be classified at the highest levels of government, ensuring that her contribution to national security would be recognized by senior officials, even if it could never be publicly acknowledged. The nature of the threat and the methods used to counter it required secrecy that would prevent most Americans from ever learning how close they had come to experiencing nuclear terrorism on their own soil. Your actions will be recognized through appropriate channels, General Hawkins assured Maria as the briefing concluded. The President has been personally briefed on this incident, and there will be significant changes in how we evaluate and utilize the skills of combat veterans transitioning to civilian roles. The promise of institutional change felt important but abstract compared to the immediate satisfaction of having prevented mass casualties through the application of skills that bureaucratic decisions had tried to waste. Maria had proven that dismissed veterans retained capabilities that could be crucial to national security, and that institutional prejudices could blind decision-makers to resources that might be essential during crisis situations. As federal personnel continued their investigation, and the nuclear device was prepared for transport to a secure facility, Maria reflected on the strange journey that had brought her from decorated sniper to dismissed janitor to unlikely hero. The path had been marked by frustration and institutional failure, but it had ultimately led to a moment when her unique combination of skills and access had been exactly what America needed to prevent catastrophe. The sun was fully above the horizon now, illuminating a desert landscape that had been the site of one of the most significant counter-terrorism operations in American history, an operation that would remain classified, but whose success had preserved thousands of innocent lives and prevented a nuclear crisis that could have changed the course of global politics. The Pentagon briefing room, 3 weeks later, bore little resemblance to the Spartan facilities of Fort Meridian, where Maria had spent 8 months mopping floors and emptying trash cans. The polished mahogany table was surrounded by senior officials from every major national security agency, their collective experience representing decades of service at the highest levels of American government. Secretary of Defense Patricia Morrison presided over the meeting with the gravity appropriate to discussing an incident that had nearly resulted in the first nuclear terrorist attack on American soil. Maria sat at the conference table wearing a crisp military uniform that bore new insignia reflecting her restoration to active duty and promotion to Master Sergeant, a rank that recognized both her previous service and her recent contributions to national security. The transformation from invisible janitor to honored briefing participant felt surreal, but the classified documents spread before her contained undeniable evidence of the catastrophe she had prevented and the larger conspiracy she had helped to expose. The forensic analysis of materials recovered from the Nevada compound has revealed the existence of what we're calling the Meridian Network. Secretary Morrison began, her voice carrying the weight of briefings that would reshape American counterintelligence operations. This was a systematic, multi-year effort by hostile foreign intelligence services to penetrate our most sensitive nuclear facilities and acquire the materials necessary for terrorist attacks against American targets. The scope of the network was staggering in its ambition and sophistication. Intelligence analysts had traced connections between the Nevada operation and similar infiltration attempts at nuclear facilities in Tennessee, South Carolina, and New Mexico. The foreign operatives had been working methodically to map American nuclear security protocols and identify personnel who could be recruited or coerced into providing access to classified materials and restricted areas. Dr. Harrison's betrayal had been just one component of a larger strategy that involved multiple compromised personnel, sophisticated technical support, and financial resources that could only have come from a nation-state adversary. The investigation had revealed bank accounts, communication networks, and operational procedures that demonstrated years of careful planning and substantial investment in what amounted to nuclear warfare conducted through terrorist proxies. Master Sergeant Vasquez's intervention prevented not just a single attack, but potentially the first in a series of coordinated strikes that could have fundamentally altered America's nuclear deterrent capability, continued General Hawkins, who had become the primary military liaison for the ongoing investigation. Intelligence recovered from the compound indicates that successful detonation of the Las Vegas device would have been followed by similar attacks against nuclear power plants and weapons storage facilities. The briefing included detailed technical analysis of the nuclear device that had been recovered, confirming that it had been designed for maximum radiological contamination rather than simply explosive yield. The weapon would have rendered large portions of Nevada uninhabitable while spreading radioactive fallout across multiple states, creating a permanent exclusion zone that would have served as a constant reminder of America's vulnerability to nuclear terrorism. Maria found herself answering questions from officials whose names she had only seen in newspapers and whose decisions affected global security policy. The Director of National Intelligence wanted to understand how her janitorial position had provided access to intelligence that conventional surveillance had missed. The Chairman of the Joint Chiefs inquired about tactical lessons that could be applied to protecting other sensitive facilities from similar infiltration attempts. The key factor was the invisibility of my position, Maria explained, drawing on months of careful observation and analysis. Personnel at the facility discussed sensitive matters freely around custodial workers, assuming that we either weren't paying attention or lacked the knowledge to understand the significance of what we were hearing. This created intelligence opportunities that wouldn't have been available to conventional security personnel. The discussion revealed fundamental flaws in how military installations approached personnel security, particularly regarding support staff who had extensive access to sensitive areas but limited oversight of their activities. Maria's experience demonstrated that former combat veterans working in seemingly menial positions retained analytical skills and situational awareness that could be valuable for detecting security threats, but institutional prejudices had prevented these capabilities from being recognized or utilized. FBI Director Catherine Walsh presented findings from the broader investigation into foreign infiltration of American nuclear facilities, painting a disturbing picture of systematic intelligence operations that had been ongoing for years without detection. The Nevada compound had been just one node in a network that included safe houses, communication centers, and weapons caches positioned to support multiple simultaneous attacks against critical infrastructure. We've identified at least 12 other foreign operatives who were embedded in sensitive positions throughout our nuclear complex, Director Walsh reported. Some had been in place for over 5 years, slowly building access and trust while gathering intelligence for what appears to have been a coordinated campaign of nuclear terrorism. The revelation that foreign spies had been successfully operating within America's most secure facilities for years raised uncomfortable questions about security screening procedures and ongoing monitoring of personnel with access to nuclear materials. The traditional approach of conducting initial background investigations followed by periodic reviews had proven inadequate against sophisticated intelligence services that could maintain deep cover operatives for extended periods. Maria's unique position as a combat veteran working in a support role had allowed her to notice anomalies that might have been overlooked by personnel without military training. Her ability to recognize the significance of irregular work patterns, unauthorized equipment usage, and suspicious communications had been crucial in identifying Dr. Harrison's betrayal before the nuclear theft could be completed. The success of this operation demonstrates the value of incorporating military veterans into security roles throughout our critical infrastructure, observed CIA Director Robert Chun. Their training in threat recognition and tactical analysis provides capabilities that complement traditional security measures. The briefing concluded with discussion of systemic changes that would be implemented based on lessons learned from the Nevada incident. New security protocols would require enhanced monitoring of personnel with access to nuclear materials, including the use of veterans and other trained observers who could detect anomalies that conventional security systems might miss. Maria was presented with the Intelligence Star, a decoration rarely awarded to military personnel for counterintelligence activities, recognizing her role in preventing what analysts considered the most serious nuclear threat to American homeland security since the end of the Cold War. The citation, which would remain classified indefinitely, acknowledged her extraordinary heroism and exceptional service in preventing a nuclear terrorist attack that could have resulted in tens of thousands of casualties. The ceremony was brief and understated, reflecting the classified nature of the operation and the ongoing sensitivity of nuclear security issues. Secretary Morrison personally presented the award, speaking words that would never appear in official transcripts, but carried the gratitude of a nation that had unknowingly come within hours of experiencing its first nuclear terrorist attack. Your actions exemplify the best traditions of American military service, Secretary Morrison said, her voice carrying genuine emotion despite the formal setting. You demonstrated that true patriotism means serving your country regardless of recognition or reward, and that the skills and dedication of our veterans remain valuable long after their official service has ended. The transformation in how Maria was perceived and treated by military leadership was dramatic and complete. Officers who had previously ignored her existence now sought her opinions on security matters. Intelligence analysts requested her insights into personnel behavior and facility operations. The same institution that had dismissed her as medically unfit now recognized her as an expert whose unique combination of combat experience and institutional access had proved invaluable, but perhaps most significantly, Maria's story had become a catalyst for broader changes in how the military evaluated and utilized the capabilities of veterans transitioning to civilian roles. New programs were being developed to place qualified veterans in positions where their skills could contribute to national security, even if they were no longer fit for combat duty. Your experience has demonstrated that we've been wasting human resources that could be crucial to our security, General Hawkins explained during a private conversation after the briefing. We're implementing new programs to ensure that veterans with relevant skills are placed in positions where they can continue contributing to national defense. The Nevada incident had also prompted reviews of security procedures at nuclear facilities worldwide, with allied nations examining their own protocols for protecting sensitive materials and monitoring personnel with access to weapons-grade nuclear materials. The successful infiltration of American facilities had demonstrated vulnerabilities that could be exploited by hostile intelligence services anywhere nuclear weapons or materials were stored. Maria's new assignment reflected the military's recognition of her unique qualifications and the value of her recent experience. She would be joining a special task force responsible for reviewing security at sensitive facilities and developing new protocols for detecting insider threats. The position would utilize both her combat experience and her recent insights into institutional vulnerabilities, ensuring that the lessons learned from the Nevada operation would be applied systematically across America's nuclear infrastructure. As she left the Pentagon that afternoon, Maria reflected on the extraordinary journey that had taken her from decorated sniper to dismissed janitor to unlikely hero in the span of less than a year. The experience had been marked by frustration and institutional failure, but it had ultimately demonstrated that true service to a country transcended official recognition and that critical capabilities could emerge from the most unexpected sources. When national security was threatened, the Nevada desert where she had made her most important shots was now the site of an ongoing federal investigation that would continue for months as authorities worked to dismantle the entire foreign intelligence network. But the immediate threat had been eliminated. Thousands of lives had been saved, and America's nuclear security had been strengthened by the dedication of a veteran who had refused to accept that her service was finished. 1 year later, Maria stood before the graduating class of the newly established Veteran Security Initiative at Quantico, her dress uniform bearing decorations that told a story of service, dismissal, and ultimate vindication. The auditorium was filled with former military personnel from all branches of service, men and women who had been deemed unfit for continued active duty, but whose skills and experience were now recognized as valuable assets for protecting America's most sensitive facilities. The program that Maria now directed had grown from the lessons learned during the Nevada incident, transforming institutional failures into systematic improvements that were already paying dividends across the national security establishment. Veterans with combat experience, intelligence backgrounds, and specialized technical skills were being placed in positions where their unique capabilities could detect threats that conventional security measures might miss. 18 months ago, I was pushing a mop through the corridors of Fort Meridian, invisible to the officers and scientists who walked past me every day. Maria told the audience, her voice carrying across the silent auditorium. That invisibility, combined with the analytical skills I had learned during 12 years of military service, became the key to preventing a nuclear terrorist attack that could have killed tens of thousands of Americans. The Veteran Security Initiative had processed over 800 applicants in its first year, placing qualified personnel in custodial, maintenance, security, and administrative positions at nuclear facilities, defense contractors, and research installations throughout the country. Each placement was carefully designed to provide both meaningful employment for veterans and enhanced security for critical infrastructure, creating a network of trained observers who understood how to recognize and report potential threats. Success stories were already accumulating. A former Marine explosives expert working as a maintenance technician at a defense contractor had identified security vulnerabilities that could have been exploited by foreign intelligence services. A retired Air Force communications specialist employed as a night security guard had detected unauthorized electronic surveillance equipment that conventional security sweeps had missed. An ex-Army intelligence analyst working in a cafeteria had overheard conversations that led to the discovery of an industrial espionage operation. Your military training has taught you to observe, analyze, and act when necessary, Maria continued, addressing the veterans who would soon be deployed to their new assignments. Those skills don't disappear when you leave active duty, and they become even more valuable when you're positioned where adversaries don't expect to encounter professional military capabilities. The program had also fundamentally changed how the Defense Department approached veteran transition services, recognizing that medical retirement or disability discharge didn't necessarily eliminate the value that experienced personnel could provide to national security. New evaluation procedures had been developed to identify veterans whose skills could be utilized in non-combat roles, ensuring that institutional knowledge and hard-won expertise weren't simply discarded due to bureaucratic inflexibility. Dr. Foster, who had become one of Maria's closest allies in developing the new security protocols, addressed the graduating class about the technical aspects of threat detection and research environments. Her presentation included details about the sophisticated methods that foreign intelligence services use to penetrate scientific facilities, emphasizing the importance of human observation in detecting activities that electronic surveillance systems might miss. The Nevada incident demonstrated that our most advanced security technology could be defeated by adversaries who understood our procedures and had inside assistance, Dr. Foster explained. But it also showed that trained human observers, properly positioned and motivated, could detect threats that our most sophisticated systems had missed. The memorial wall in the lobby of the Veteran Security Initiative building included photographs and brief biographies of American personnel who had been killed or injured in terrorist attacks against military and civilian targets over the past 2 decades. Maria had insisted on its inclusion as a reminder that the work being done by program graduates had life and death implications for innocent Americans who depended on effective security measures to protect them from those who wished to do harm. Among the photographs was one of Dr. Harrison, included not as a hero but as a cautionary reminder of how trusted personnel could become threats to the institutions they had sworn to protect. His image served as a constant reminder that security was ultimately about people, their motivations, and their willingness to uphold the values and commitments that defined American society. Agent Mitchell, who had been promoted to Deputy Director of the FBI's Counterintelligence Division, spoke to the graduates about the evolving nature of threats facing American institutions and the critical role that veterans could play in detecting and countering foreign intelligence operations. Her presentation included classified briefings about ongoing investigations that had been initiated based on intelligence gathered by Veterans Security Initiative personnel. The success of this program has exceeded our most optimistic projections, Agent Mitchell reported. Veterans deployed through the initiative have contributed to 17 active counterintelligence investigations and prevented at least 3 serious security breaches at critical facilities. Their unique combination of military training and civilian access has proved invaluable in detecting threats that conventional security measures had failed to identify. The international implications of the Nevada incident had also led to enhanced cooperation with allied nations in protecting nuclear facilities and materials from terrorist threats. Maria had briefed security officials from NATO countries about the methods used by foreign operatives to penetrate American facilities, sharing lessons learned that were being applied to strengthen nuclear security protocols worldwide. The program's success had attracted attention from senior political leaders who recognized its value for both national security and veteran employment. Congressional funding had been increased substantially, allowing for expansion into additional geographic areas and the inclusion of veterans with specialized skills in cybersecurity, communications, and advanced weapons systems. Maria's personal transformation from dismissed janitor to program director had become a symbol of institutional redemption and the value of recognizing capabilities that bureaucratic processes might overlook. Her story was being used in leadership training programs throughout the military, emphasizing the importance of looking beyond official classifications to identify and utilize human resources that could be crucial during crisis situations. The lesson I want you to take from my experience is that your value as Americans and as veterans doesn't end when your active duty service concludes, Maria told the graduating class during her closing remarks. The skills you've developed, the dedication you've demonstrated, and the oath you've taken to protect and defend the Constitution remain relevant regardless of your official status or job title. The graduation ceremony concluded with the presentation of certificates and assignments that would deploy the new graduates to facilities across the country where their skills and experience would enhance security measures that protected America's most sensitive assets. Each graduate had been carefully screened and trained to recognize the types of threats that had nearly succeeded in Nevada, ensuring that similar operations would face systematic opposition from trained professionals. As the ceremony ended and the graduates prepared to take on their new responsibilities, Maria reflected on the strange journey that had brought her from the mountains of Afghanistan to the corridors of Fort Meridian to the podium at Quantico. The path had been marked by frustration and institutional failure, but it had ultimately led to systemic changes that would protect American lives and national security for generations to come. The Nevada desert where she had made her most important shots was now the site of a memorial that honored the federal agents and military personnel who had participated in stopping the nuclear terrorist attack. But the real memorial to that night's events was the Veteran Security Initiative itself, a living testament to the value of recognizing and utilizing the capabilities of those who had served their country in uniform and remained ready to serve. in whatever capacity their nation required. The invisible janitor, who had once pushed a mop through military corridors, had become a visible symbol of institutional change and the enduring value of American veterans, proving that true service to country transcended official recognition, and that the most important victories were often won by those whom others had chosen to overlook. 6 months after the graduation ceremony, Maria received an unexpected visitor. At her Quantico office, a young woman in Army fatigues knocked hesitantly on her door, introducing herself as Specialist Jennifer Torres, recently medically retired after losing her left leg to an IED in Syria. Torres had been a military intelligence analyst before her injury, and she was struggling with the transition to civilian life. "Ma'am, I heard about your story and the Veteran Security Initiative," Torres said, her voice carrying the uncertainty that Maria remembered from her own darkest days. "The Army says I'm not fit for intelligence work anymore, but I still want to serve my country somehow." Maria smiled, recognizing the determination that had once driven her own journey from dismissed veteran to national security asset. "Specialist Torres, let me tell you about a position we have available at a defense research facility in Colorado. It's officially listed as a data entry clerk, but the right person could use that access to help protect some of our most critical military technologies." As Torres left her office with renewed purpose and a new assignment, Maria looked out her window at the flags flying over Quantico and thought about all the other veterans who believed their service was over. The invisible army of dismissed warriors was still out there, waiting for someone to recognize that their dedication and skills remained valuable long after bureaucratic decisions had written them off. The janitor they had ignored had become the director they now respected. But her most important victory wasn't personal recognition. It was proving that America's strength lay not just in its active military forces, but in the countless veterans who remained ready to serve when their country needed them most. What incredible stories of overlooked heroes do you know? Have you ever witnessed someone's true capabilities being underestimated? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear about the unsung heroes in your own life. And if this story inspired you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell for more incredible tales of courage, determination, and triumph against all odds.